The valley was quiet, too quiet. For weeks, no one had seen the baby dragons. The villagers whispered in worry and even the guards were tense. Dragons were more than just creatures in this valley, they were part of life. They helped protect the village from wild predators, and they were a wonder to watch. But now their absence left a heavy silence in the air. Elias, a young farmer, noticed the change first. Every morning he walked to his fields, expecting to hear the soft rustle of dragon wings or the tiny chirps of the baby dragons. But there was nothing. The usual warmth of the dragons running across the grass was gone. He frowned, his hands gripping his worn wooden hoe tightly. Where could they have gone? He whispered to himself. The village had searched everywhere. People had gone to the nearby caves, the riverbanks, even the cliffs where the dragons sometimes played. Nothing. It was as if the baby dragons had vanished into thin air. Some villagers said they might have flown far away looking for food. Others feared worse, that something dangerous had taken them. But no one knew for sure. Elias decided to check his own barn. It was small and simple, filled with hay and farming tools. He had fed the dragons there before, leaving fresh fruit and clean water. Sometimes they liked to hide among the hay, curling up together in the warm corners. But when he opened the door that morning, the barn was empty. Not even a single scale or tiny footprint. The silence inside felt heavier than outside. He stepped outside and looked at the valley. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in pink and orange. Birds chirped and the wind rustled the leaves, but nothing moved like it should. A few villagers passed by, carrying tools or buckets, their faces grim. Some avoided looking at Elias, as if they were afraid he might ask questions they couldn't answer. "Have you seen them?" he asked one older man. The man shook his head slowly. "No, they're gone. I haven't seen them in weeks." Elias felt a lump in his throat. He loved the dragons. Their tiny wings, the way they sniffed his hands when he fed them, even their little puffs of smoke when they were happy. To think they might be gone forever made his chest ache. But he refused to give up. If no one else could find them, he would. He began walking through the valley, following the small paths where the dragons had played. He looked for signs, broken branches, flattened grass, anything unusual. Near the river, he saw some faint glowing footprints, too small to be a person's and too strange to be any normal animal. His heart skipped. Could it be them? He followed the tracks carefully, making sure not to scare whatever had made them. The tracks led deeper into the trees, where the shadows were thicker and the air smelled of damp earth. Hours passed, and Elias found nothing but empty ground and silence. His stomach growled and the sun climbed higher, making the day warm. He sat on a rock, feeling tired but determined. "They're here somewhere," he muttered. "I just need to find them." The villagers had given up hope, but he knew the dragons wouldn't go far without hiding in a safe place. They were smart even as babies. They knew danger and avoided it. That gave him hope. By evening, Elias returned to his barn, tired and dusty. He pushed the door open slowly. For a moment, he expected it to be empty again, like every other place he had searched. But something felt different. There was a soft, almost invisible warmth in the air, like tiny hearts beating close together. He leaned closer, squinting at the hay. Could it be? Elias held his breath. Weeks of searching, worry, and sleepless nights had led to this quiet moment. Whatever was waiting in the barn, he hoped it was his little dragons, safe and unharmed. He crouched down, listening for any sound. The wind outside blew softly, and the sky turned orange as the sun began to set. The valley was quiet, but Elias felt a spark of hope. The baby dragons were out there somewhere. He would find them no matter what. He stayed in the barn long after sunset, eyes scanning every corner, ears straining for even the faintest sound of tiny wings or soft breathing. His hands rested on the warm wood of the barn and he whispered, "Come on, little ones. I know you're here." Outside, the valley was calm, the night slowly taking over. But inside Elias's heart, a fire of determination burned bright. He would not let the dragon stay hidden forever. Not if he could help it. And deep somewhere in the barn, small glowing eyes blinked in the dark. Elias did not sleep that night. The thought of the baby dragons hiding somewhere in the valley would not leave him. He rose before dawn, pulled on his boots and grabbed a lantern. The village was still quiet. Most people had gone back to their homes after another long day of searching without results. But Elias could not rest. He had to find them himself. He started with the barn. Every corner, every stack of hay, every shadow was checked carefully. He tapped the wooden beams and listened. Nothing. Then he noticed a small patch of hay that had been moved recently. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Elias knew the dragons liked to burrow into hay for warmth. His heart beat faster. He reached down and gently pushed the hay aside. There was nothing there, but the trail was real. Something had been hiding here. He left the barn and went to the edge of the forest, following the small paths the dragons sometimes took when they played. The morning air was cool, filled with birdsong and the scent of wet grass. Elias's eyes scanned every tree, every rock. He crouched to examine a paw-shaped mark in the dirt. It was tiny, with faint burn marks that looked like tiny sparks. He frowned. Baby dragons. Had to be. He followed the trail deeper into the trees. The forest grew thicker and the sunlight barely reached the ground. Every step made him more careful. He did not want to scare the dragons if they were nearby. After a while he came to a small clearing. The grass was flattened in a circle like someone, or something, had curled up there. Tiny footprints led away from the clearing into a small stream. Elias knelt and dipped his hand into the water. There were faint scales floating on the surface. His heart leapt. The dragons had been here recently. Hours passed. Elias followed the trail across the valley. He climbed over rocks, crossed small streams and even crawled through thick bushes. His hands were scratched and his clothes were dirty, but he did not care. Every clue, every small sign, made him more certain that the dragons were near. He stopped at the cliff edge where the valley opened to the forest beyond. From here he could see the village, his barn, and the fields stretching far into the distance. The wind blew hard, but he felt a strange warmth in the air, as if the dragons were calling him. He closed his eyes and listened. The forest was quiet, but deep in the shadows he thought he heard a soft, almost musical chirp. He froze. His ears strained. There it was again, a tiny sound, high and gentle. Following the sound carefully, Elias descended the cliff and moved toward a small grove. The trees here were thick and old, with roots that twisted like giant snakes. He pushed through, ducking under low branches, and came to a hidden hollow. Inside, the ground was soft with moss, and small scratches marked the bark of the trees. Something had been living here. Something small but not human. He crouched and listened. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared among the roots. Elias's eyes widened. 3 tiny lights, moving slowly, almost like fireflies. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. The glow grew brighter, and then he saw them. 3 baby dragons curled together, their tiny bodies glowing softly. Their scales shimmered in blue and green light, and their little wings twitched as they slept. They were alive. They were safe. Elias's lips curled into a smile, but he did not move closer. He remembered all the stories about how dragons were cautious, even with humans they trusted. He sat quietly, watching them breathe softly, their tiny chest rising and falling. They were smaller than he remembered, but full of life and magic. He felt a warm pride. The dragons had survived the weeks alone. They had been clever, hiding in places no one thought to look. After a while, Elias gently left the hollow, leaving the dragons undisturbed. He needed a plan. The valley was too dangerous to let them wander freely. Predators, storms, and humans who did not understand dragons could hurt them. He had to bring them back safely. He returned to the village, careful to stay out of sight. His mind raced with ideas: how to build a safe path for them, how to keep them fed, and how to ensure no one harmed them. Back in the barn, he prepared soft blankets, fresh water, and small fruits he knew the dragons liked. He worked quickly but quietly, hoping the creatures would trust him enough to come. He stayed near the barn door, watching the sky turn orange with the sunset. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves made his heart leap. Were they coming tonight? Could he finally see them safe and sound? As night fell, the wind whispered through the valley. The villagers were asleep, dreaming of lost dragons and missed chances. But Elias stayed awake, determined. Somewhere in the darkness, the baby dragons were out there, waiting for someone who believed in them. He tightened his hands on the wooden railing of the barn, whispering softly to the night, "I will find you. I promise." And somewhere in the valley, tiny eyes glimmered in the dark, watching the farmer who had never stopped looking. Elias had not slept all night. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow made him glance around. He carried a small lantern, its light flickering across the barn walls. He opened the door slowly, careful not to make a noise. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, the familiar scent that had once welcomed the baby dragons. He stepped inside and froze. For a moment, everything seemed empty. The stacks of hay, the tools, the floor, they were all as he remembered. But there was something different in the air. A soft, almost invisible warmth, like tiny hearts beating close together. Elias's chest tightened. Could it really be? He crouched low, moving slowly among the hay. His eyes scanned every corner. He whispered, "Here, little ones, it's okay. I won't hurt you. His voice was soft, trembling slightly, but the barn was still. Then, a tiny shuffle from the far corner made him pause. A faint glow appeared in the shadows. At first, Elias thought it was just the lantern reflecting off something shiny. But as he leaned closer, the glow pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. His heart raced. There they were. 3 tiny baby dragons, curled up together, their scales shimmering with soft blues and greens. They were asleep, their little wings tucked around their bodies. One of them had a tiny puff of smoke escaping from its nostrils as it dreamed. Elias's eyes filled with tears. He had been searching for weeks, climbing cliffs, following streams, and listening in the forests, and now, finally, he had found them. They were safe. They were alive. And they had chosen this barn as their hiding place. He moved closer slowly, careful not to disturb them. Every step was careful, measured like a dance. The dragons twitched in their sleep but did not wake. Elias's hand hovered over one of the tiny creatures, almost afraid to touch it. He whispered again, I won't hurt you. I promise. Minutes passed. The barn was silent except for the soft breathing of the dragons. Elias looked around. There were small marks in the hay where they had burrowed. A few tiny scales caught the light of the lantern. He realized that the dragons had survived on their own for weeks, finding small scraps and staying hidden from danger. They had been clever, cautious, and strong even as babies. Elias gently picked up a small blanket he had brought from his home. Carefully he placed it near the dragons, hoping they would curl onto it for warmth. One of the dragons stirred slightly, opening a small eye. It glimmered in the lantern light, curious but cautious. Elias held his breath. The little creature blinked again, then rested its head back on the hay. It had sensed him but trusted him enough to stay calm. Elias smiled. He whispered softly, You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here. Slowly he left the lantern on the floor and sat nearby, watching them sleep. He thought about the weeks of worry, the searches that had led nowhere, and the fear that he might never find them. And now, sitting in the barn with the dragons so close, he felt a happiness he had never known before. Night fell outside, and the barn was bathed in the soft glow of the lantern and the dragon's tiny shimmering scales. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. These creatures were not just adorable, they were fragile and needed care. He had to make sure they stayed safe from the dangers of the valley, storms, predators, and even humans who might not understand them. He stayed with them all night, barely moving, listening to the rhythm of their breathing. Each time one of them twitched or shifted in sleep, he felt a surge of relief. They were alive. They were real. And they were his responsibility now. As dawn approached, a soft golden light entered through the barn windows. The dragons stirred slightly, stretching their tiny wings. Elias quietly stood and went to fetch some water and food he had prepared. He placed it carefully near the dragons, who sniffed cautiously but did not flee. They were hungry but gentle, their trust in him growing with each passing moment. Elias watched them eat, his heart swelling with pride. These tiny creatures, once lost and feared gone forever, had survived. And now they were safe because of his patience, courage, and determination. He whispered, We'll get through this together. For the first time in weeks, Elias allowed himself to relax. The barn was warm, the dragons were alive, and the valley outside remained quiet. But inside, a bond had formed between a human and the baby dragons. A bond that would grow stronger with each day. Elias knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments of fear and obstacles to overcome. But for now he simply watched the dragons sleep, feeling a sense of peace and hope he had not felt in a long time. Outside, the wind rustled softly, carrying the scent of the valley. Inside, in a quiet corner of the barn, the baby dragons slept, safe and sound, while Elias kept his promise, to find them, to protect them, and to never let them feel lost again. Elias stayed in the barn long after sunrise. The baby dragons had eaten, but they did not leave their corner. They huddled together, blinking at him with cautious eyes. Each movement he made was careful and slow. He did not want to scare them, not after all the time they had been hiding. He knelt down near them and held out his hand, empty and open. I won't hurt you, he whispered. His voice was soft, calm, almost like a lullaby. One of the dragons tilted its head, studying him carefully. Its tiny green eyes glimmered with curiosity. Slowly, it inched forward, sniffing his fingers. Elias held his breath. The little dragon blinked, then tapped his hand gently with its tiny claw. A smile spread across Elias's face. Good, he said softly. You can trust me. Encouraged, the other 2 dragons moved closer too, sniffing the air around him. Elias gently stroked the scales of the first dragon. They were warm and surprisingly soft. A small puff of smoke escaped its nostrils, not in anger or fear but in contentment. The bond began quietly, almost magically. Elias talked to them, telling them about the valley, the village, and how worried everyone had been. He moved slowly, letting them watch his hands and his face. They began to respond to his voice, to the gentle movements of his hands. Every tiny gesture mattered. Every small action built trust. By afternoon, the dragons were following him around the barn, stepping carefully on the hay, occasionally tripping over each other in their playful curiosity. Elias laughed, a sound that made them pause and look at him with wide, sparkling eyes. They chirped softly, small musical sounds that reminded him of birds. The dragons were alive, full of energy and eager to explore, but they still stayed close to him. Elias realized that he needed to prepare the barn for them properly. He moved the hay to make soft nests in different corners. He added blankets and small baskets for them to curl up in. He put water bowls and a small supply of fruit where they could easily reach. He worked quietly, making sure nothing was too close or too high for the tiny dragons. As he worked, the dragons explored their new space. One of them climbed onto a low shelf, sniffed a basket, then slipped back down, chirping happily. Another curled up in a corner, breathing softly and puffing little sparks of smoke. Elias watched them with pride. Each moment they were becoming more confident. Each moment they were learning that he meant them no harm. Evening came, and the sun painted the barn with warm golden light. Elias sat down near the dragons, letting them rest on their new nests. They crawled onto the blankets he had laid out, pressing against each other and to him. One of the dragons curled its tiny tail around his wrist. Elias smiled and whispered, "You are safe now. I will take care of you." The feeling of connection was strong. Elias realized something important. These dragons were not just creatures to be protected. They were friends. They had chosen him, trusted him, and let him into their world. And he had chosen them, deciding to search, to care, and to never give up. The bond went both ways, silent but powerful. As night fell, Elias lit a small lantern in the barn. The dragons gathered near him, their glowing scales casting soft colors across the walls. They watched him as he moved slowly, drank water, and prepared for the night. He spoke softly, telling them stories about the village, about the other humans who loved dragons, and about the adventures they could have together. The dragons listened, their eyes wide, their bodies relaxed. Elias knew that the real challenge was only beginning. The dragons had survived on their own for weeks, hiding from danger, staying away from humans and living off scraps. Now they would need guidance, care, and protection. But he also knew they were strong, clever, and capable of learning. With patience and trust they could thrive. He settled onto a haystack near them, letting the dragons curl around him. Their warmth seeped into his clothes, their soft breathing became a rhythm he could follow. Outside, the valley was quiet, the wind carrying the faint scent of forests and rivers. Inside, the barn glowed with warmth, life, and hope. Elias whispered to the dragons, "We are a team now. Together, nothing can harm us." The dragons chirped softly, nudging him gently. It was not just a sound, it was a promise. A promise of trust, of companionship, and of a future where humans and dragons could live together, safe and strong. For the first time in weeks, Elias felt peace. The baby dragons were not lost. They were here, and they had chosen him as their protector. And he had chosen them as his friends. Outside, the valley waited. But inside the barn, in the warm glow of the lantern, a bond had been made. A connection that would grow stronger every day, stronger than fear, stronger than distance, and stronger than anything that might come their way. And for the first time, Elias realized that finding them was not just about saving them. It was about understanding them, trusting them, and becoming part of something magical. A bond between humans and dragons that would never be broken. The morning sun shone brightly over the valley. Birds sang, and the wind moved gently through the fields. The village looked peaceful, but Elias knew it had been a long, worrying few weeks for everyone. The baby dragons were safe, and that was what mattered most. Yet he also knew that safety required planning, patience, and care. Elias spent the early hours preparing the barn. He reinforced the corners so the dragons could not accidentally hurt themselves, set up more soft hay nests, and placed food and water in easy-to-reach spots. He even built small climbing posts from wood for the dragons to explore safely. Every step he took was careful, thoughtful, and designed to help the baby dragons feel at home. As he worked, the dragons followed him everywhere. One would climb onto his shoulder, another would crawl along his boots, and the third would inspect every new object he brought into the barn. Elias laughed quietly to himself. "You are all curious little things, aren't you?" he said softly. They chirped in response, small happy sounds that made him smile even more. By mid-morning, the villagers had gathered near the barn. Word had spread quickly, Elias had found the dragons. Children pressed their faces against the windows, eyes wide with wonder. Adults whispered to each other, relief and awe written across their faces. The dragons, though still cautious, peeked from behind haystacks, their glowing scales catching the sunlight. Elias stepped forward and called gently, "Come on, little ones. It's okay. You are safe now." One by one the dragons emerged, moving carefully toward him. They were no longer afraid. They chirped softly, nudging his hands and legs. The villagers gasped, some clapping quietly. Even the village guards looked impressed. These small creatures, thought lost forever, had returned, alive and unharmed, because of human courage and care. Over the next few days, Elias taught the dragons how to interact safely with the village. He showed them where the food and water were, how to climb the posts he had built, and where they could rest without being disturbed. He spoke to them in soft, patient tones, and they responded with gentle chirps and tiny movements. Every moment strengthened the bond between human and dragon. The villagers began to understand the dragons in a new way. They had been afraid before, unsure how to help or interact with such magical creatures. But seeing the baby dragons trust Elias, seeing them play and explore safely, changed everything. Children were allowed to watch from a distance, learning how to move quietly and carefully. Farmers helped by leaving extra food and clearing dangerous obstacles in the barn and nearby fields. The entire village worked together, showing that humans and dragons could coexist peacefully. Elias noticed a change in the dragons too. They were playful now, chasing small falling leaves, puffing tiny sparks in the air, and curling up near him as he worked. Sometimes they would rest their tiny heads on his lap or shoulder, a quiet trust shining in their glowing eyes. He felt a deep pride and joy. These dragons were not just creatures to protect. They were companions, friends, and a reminder of what humans could achieve with patience, courage, and care. One afternoon, Elias took the dragons outside. The valley stretched wide and green, with forests and streams glittering in the sunlight. The dragons were nervous at first, stepping carefully on the grass. But soon they began to explore, testing their wings and hopping over rocks and fallen logs. Elias followed, letting them discover the world at their own pace. Their trust in him was evident. They did not fly away. They did not hide. They stayed near him, chirping happily, their scales reflecting the golden sunlight. Word spread beyond the village. Travelers and neighboring settlements came to see the baby dragons, amazed at the bond between humans and these magical creatures. They marveled at Elias's patience, bravery, and gentle care. People began to understand that human kindness could protect even the most fragile and magical creatures. It was a lesson in courage, empathy, and responsibility, a human story of heroism that did not involve weapons or wars, only patience, trust, and love. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in warm orange and pink hues, Elias sat on a large rock, watching the dragons curl up together. They had explored, played, and returned safely to the barn for the night. He felt a wave of relief and happiness. They had survived weeks of hiding, and now they were safe because humans had cared enough to search, protect, and understand them. He whispered softly, "We did it. We made it." The dragons chirped softly as if agreeing. Elias smiled. The village, the valley, and the dragons had all learned something important. Courage and care, even from one person, could change the world. That night, the barn glowed softly with the warm light of lanterns. The dragons slept peacefully, curled up in their nests, safe and loved. Elias stayed nearby, keeping watch, but he did not feel fear anymore. He felt hope. The valley, once quiet with worry, was now alive again with the promise of friendship, trust, and human courage. And somewhere deep in the valley, the baby dragons dreamed of flying high, knowing that they were safe, loved, and never truly alone. Elias had found them, but more importantly, he had shown that humans could be heroes in ways that mattered most, through patience, empathy, and unwavering determination. The valley was quiet again, but it was a peaceful, happy quiet. A quiet filled with the gentle breathing of baby dragons and the soft heartbeat of a human who had never given up.